Welcome back to Cool Clubs Reviews. We're in shaft reviews again. Today we're going to dive into the Ventus stuff, VeloCore versus non-VeloCore. It's just in the blue line. We're going to start with the 5 series, so 50 gram regular.
Yeah, so there's obviously a Ventus, that everybody knows about. It's on tour. Everyone knows about that one. There's a non-VeloCore that comes in a lot of standard clubs and stuff. And people are like, what's the difference? It's the same shaft, isn't it? And it's just a different paint job or they put a different marking on it. No, it's not. It's an entirely different shaft. It was designed for a specific OEM, and there's actually a couple different ones out there, from what I understand. We just picked one of them. I'm not sure which OEM this one's from, but it's a different shaft than the regular Ventus.
Yes. I mean, this is going to highlight the points that we measure on the difference,
right.
And then we're going to explain why that is going to turn into maybe a performance betterment, having VeloCore over non-VeloCore.
Yeah.
So let's just take a look at some of the static measurements right now.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the CPMs, which is an overall measurement of flexness, it actually looks at the butt stiffness more than anything else. You can tell the non-VeloCore is actually quite a bit stiffer, almost 20 CPMs, which would be 2 full flexes. So it's a lot different.
Yeah.
The torque, obviously, in the non-VeloCore is quite a bit higher than the VeloCore. That's just, less expensive materials. You got to use more of them. So the torque goes up some. As far as the EI curve and how the things are kind of, the tip, mid, and butt section are, the tip section in, the VeloCore is actually relatively stiff in a 5.
Yeah.
So, relative to most 5 shafts, it's a relatively low launching shaft.
Yeah.
Whereas, the non-VeloCore here, quite a bit softer tip, and it's kind of a mid-high launching shaft, which really none of the standard VeloCores are high launching.
Yeah, we never saw anything in the mid-high.
Yeah, even the red is kind of a mid-launching shaft. So this non-VeloCore is a totally different animal.
And those playability numbers at the end there?
Yeah, they're relatively close, right? So even though it measures 20 cycles softer, you think 2 full flexes. Well, we're kind of seeing more like a half a flex.
Yeah.
Because it's lower torque, it's stiffer tip, it's just a different animal.
And this is where the confusion might come in. You walk into a store,
right.
There's a $350 option, and
right.
there's a $0 option, and they look the same. Right. So you're like, okay, well, I can play either one, right?
Yeah, and overall, what Fuji's done with this, and this is what all manufacturers do to some extent, as you start using better materials, you can lower torque quite a bit more and still keep the weight down. The downside to that is it feels a little stiffer and stuff. So my guess is the VeloCore name has something to do with making it feel better. Yeah. So there's some other materials they got that's kind of helping to make up for the fact that the torque is quite a bit lower.
So if we just hone in on 2 numbers, right?
Right.
So a CPM, which is, you said butt stiffness. Most people,
yeah,
you're gripping
it's a good overall measurement of stiffness. Yeah.
And you're feeling that, right? You'd feel CPM, you'd feel the shaft wiggle more or less, and then you compare it to torque. So you've got the VeloCore is the lower of the CPM, the softer feeling, but the lower torque. So then that tightens up the feel.
They kind of counteract each other, right? So what they're trying to do is they're trying to make you the softest shaft. That's what we do in all our fittings to some extent. We want the softest shaft you can control. And the softer you can make the shaft, or the more CPMs, the more wiggle it gets, the further you can hit it, right? The more, movement the shaft has, the more you can hit it. You do that too much, you obviously start spraying it everywhere. So what they've done with this is they've lowered the torque to enable you to play a slightly softer CPM shaft or flexible shaft than you might normally play. So you get a little more kick out of it, but you don't lose the control because the torque's lower and tighter, and the tip's stiffer, which also makes it more stable.
So the non-VeloCore, in this case, is going to feel more stout, and then the torque's going to offset that because it's higher torque again.
Right.
But that kind of goes against that theory that you're just talking about. It means you can't get as much whip out of the shaft, and they've had to increase the torque, which could potentially increase the dispersion as well.
Right, so they had to go up in the CPMs to make it stiffer. Yeah.
Right.
So basically what you get for the VeloCore shafts, with VeloCore in it, is you get some more distance out of it without losing control because of better materials. Can't really make it any simpler than that. But that's basically the end of the day, what happens.
So let's just cross-reference this. Let's go into the stiffs.
Let's take a look at a couple other ones. So we'll pull up the stiff shafts here. Stiff's kind of a similar story, right? It's 10 CPMs higher as far as the frequency goes. It's almost a degree lower in torque, which is a lot.
A lot.
The tip stiffness, a little closer on these. They're relatively close. Obviously, the non-VeloCore is a little stiffer tip, so it's got a little bit lower launch.
Yep.
But playability-wise, our numbers came up almost identical, right? So even though these shafts measure 10 CPMs different, as far as how stiff they play, They're very similar.
So same player walks in the door again, but they're getting
Yep.
soft feel with low torque and stiff feel with high torque.
Right. But again, you want the softer one because you get more distance out of it.
Right.
So
Exactly right.
you know, similar type thing.
Well, let's fingers crossed that it carries across to the X.
Yeah, we
now.
haven't looked at this yet, so we might get surprised by this one. It'll go backwards on us, but I doubt it. So in the X Flex, which this is obviously a 7X, so this is a pretty stout beast right here.
Yeah.
Non-VeloCore is, again, 15 CPMs higher in torque. It's over a degree lower in torque.
Yeah.
And, you know, it plays, you know, relatively similar. This is within a half a flex anyway, so this is the same person probably can play these two clubs. And similar launch characteristics for the most part.
So this is interesting. This is the only one where the tip is flipped around.
It's a little bit stiffer, not a ton. You know, that's kind of why it plays a little bit stiffer too, because it's actually got a stiffer tip and higher CPMs, and the difference in torque isn't enough to make the difference. But you know, again, the same story. You know, you use better materials, you can get a little more kick out of it and not lose control.
Yeah.
And hit a little further.
So that's interesting for the guy who wants weight. I think that's an interesting story.
Right.
Because this guy's, you know, generally you get to a 70 gram, which is nearly an 80 gram golf shaft in mass.
Right.
You want that to feel good. You don't want it to feel like a blunt, you know, rod. It wants to have some lower torques for the control for sure, which is a byproduct of more material, generally speaking. But then the lower CPMs will actually start to feel good at that weight.
If you mix those two together, but the CPMs that high and the torque that low, you'd have a post.
Yeah, it would be bad.
Which is, you call it, you know, you call that an 8. Right, which are a real beast, by the way.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I feel like we've wrapped it up, but this really does highlight the importance of the VeloCore, what it does, what it gives the player, and performance, right?
Yeah, it's obviously a super shaft. It's #1 on the tour by a mile, #1 in retail sales. It's a full line, right? There's the red, blue, and black, and there's, you know, TR versus non-TR in weights from 5 to 8. So you've got, you know, some 50 shafts or so between a bunch of them. But they definitely work well.
Yeah. Hopefully people watch this. There's nothing sneaky going on. You know, no one's trying to pull the wool over your eyes. They're different products. They do different things, and you get what you pay for.
Yeah, to some extent, that's true.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah.